Hey, good evening, good morning, good night. Happy Tuesday, happy Monday, happy whatever day of the week it is. Excited if you're listening. My name is Gus C. Foster. Welcome to another episode of the Man Talk Monday podcast. Today, continuing my series called Odd Man Out. Now, if you didn't listen to the introductory series, I, long story short, spent a little bit over 2.5 years having conversations with a bunch of dudes who I had a number of things in common, but the biggest thing that we had in common was that we were and or are actively stepfathers. Now, in these conversations, I got to see not necessarily the dark side, but the realities of stepfatherhood and parenting as a step parent or adoptive parent from the from the perspective of others, and hearing their thoughts and their cares and their worries and their lives, the ups and downs, and the entire dynamic. I was able to chronicle that over that 2.5 years and compile it into a number of articles that I released on the Substack, which you can find on a link to this. But yeah, in that introduction, I just talked about how I came up with a concept and reaching out to these men. And the one common question that I asked every single one of them from these free flowing talks, the only thing that I pressed on in any way was asking them, would they suggest this life for anyone else? Would they ask anybody else to really be a stepdad or a stepfather? Um, and of course, the responses varied, and I'll totally encourage you, please, man, go subscribe, check out the Substack. And yeah, the first two episodes are out, or the first two articles are out. I'm converting all of these somewhat into an audio version, but not the full interview, just maybe dabbling into the first paragraph or two that I released to give somewhat of an overview of the conversation without too much detail so that you still go subscribe to the Substack. But yeah, this is Odd Man Out. And the reason I titled it Odd Man Out is from my own perspective as a stepfather, being someone who went fully 100% into being a stepfather and husband and making the blended concept of the blended family work, and then seeing at times where, regardless of my efforts, I still was somewhat the odd man out. So in these conversations with these men, I noticed the same with them. So that's how we got the title, and want to do a series just on different perspectives on how people not just navigate it, but even the ideal of, or the idea of, blended families and stepfathers, step parenting overall, but specifically stepfathers, the difficulties outside of the praise that's given, because often we talk about that. And I'll bring that up in the next episode that follows this. But in this episode, I kind of want to go to somewhat the history of how this was popularized, but its introduction into the mainstream. Now, of course, we all know people have been blending families for years. Like, I'm a Christian. You want to talk about a blended family? Perhaps the most blended family ever was Mary and Joseph, because Joseph is clearly a stepdaddy because he ain't Jesus' daddy. Like, that's the OG. Like, if you really want to go blended families, that's the OG blended family. Mary, Joseph, Jesus. OG, probably low key if you think about it, on record, like the first blended family, at least from the standpoint of biblical standpoint. But all jokes and realities aside, there's this has always been a thing. You talk about widows who their husbands would pass away, and in time, specifically in a more, let's say, traditional patriarchal societies, which have been all of your societies for the most part, how they've been built, and how you would have women in these structures who, regardless of their intelligence and ingenuity and skill set, at times, just the way laws were, they couldn't own land, they couldn't run business, they weren't privy to certain things just due to how they were born. Their anatomy did not allow them in those spaces, and that sucks. And it would be revisionist history to make it seem like it was anything else, but that's what it was. And those women recognized that, and they leaned into it and learned, here's how I figured this out. And part of one of those things was remarry. So the idea of having your child having a stepfather or being in a blended family is nothing new. This was something common. Now, again, of course, it was different because these are, again, I'm using the reference of a widow, someone whose husband died. Like, there was all the, you've seen 100 movies, he died tragically in war. Yeah, this is a thing. This is a thing. Like, this is common. People remarry, they have kids in marriage. You remarry, families blend. This is common. But we really didn't, not necessarily promote it, but it wasn't in your face. Even though people knew it was common every day, it wasn't something that you saw in the media. It wasn't something that we promoted, if you will. There were conversations, you had them with your uncles, aunts, you went to the weddings, and this again was a common, regular thing. People remarried and they remarried with kids. But at some point in time, there came a twist. There came a new beginning. There came a genesis, if you will. That genesis occurred around 1966, 1967, when a producer in Hollywood was reading an article that said close to 30% of new marriages in the United States of America were blended families. What this person read was close to one third of all new marriages in the US included some child from a previous marriage or relationship. From that, reading that article, they did a little bit more research, looked around and assessed their own lives and said, I think we can make a show out of this. I think there's a demographic that would enjoy this because for a lot of people, this is common. This is their life. This is their experience. And this is around, if you're somebody who's a history buff like me, this is the late 60s, in a period of time where color televisions were becoming more accessible. We're in more families' homes than they ever were. And this was also at a juncture in time where color TV sales were just starting to bypass black and white television sales. So for 2, almost 3 years, this producer looks at all these numbers. He sees there's more TVs, there's more production value, color. We're entering into the 70s. There's so much color TV, this family dynamic. We could do it. And this producer and his friends and his cohorts sit down and they create the Brady Bunch. That is where the crux and the idea of the Brady Bunch came. A rise in television sales and homes for families and a demographic that saw or wanted to see themselves on television. Now, this is Leave It to Beaver era. This is Eight is Enough era. These are all of your, coming out of post World War era family shows where it's still very traditional, stay-at-home wife, hard-working husband. This again, these are the dynamics that we were working with. The quote-unquote traditional family was on TV. But now, you're starting to see the introduction of shows like The Twilight Zone, which was, I believe, one of the first programs to put an all-black cast on an episode or series. You're starting to see from even around that point in time, Star Trek, your first like interracial kiss on television. You're starting to see new things, but these aren't new things. They're mirroring everyday life. So yeah, this producer, this writer reads, hey man, that's close to a third of the population. I think this is an untapped market for entertainment. And they generate and they create the Brady Bunch. Now, mind you, I'm 40 years old. The Brady Bunch only ran for 5 or 6 seasons. And when you look at Nielsen numbers or ratings, it never was a show that everyone clamored to get to their in front of the boob tube and watch. It never was that. It developed a cult following after this series ended. It generated 9, 10, 11 spinoffs. The following was such because even that niche group, that 30% that allegedly this producer read, that small group, these people carried this clearly because these were people who saw themselves on the show. They saw that representation of themselves. This show created hella spinoffs. I remember the Brady Bunch movie remake that they made years and years later. The idea of a blended family, this architect dad with a live-in nanny or attendant marries this woman with three daughters, and they just make it work. The ups and downs. It was great. It was great. And that was one of the first times that you saw that on television. Mind you, this is the same television where less than a decade before, you're looking at Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz in two separate beds. Now we fast forwarded, and you've got a whole stepdaddy with a whole family where the wife and the kids all take the name Brady. This was someone's life. This was real. And I think from that, now you have a lot of folk when they have discussions on the ideas of blended families, specifically for stepfathers. It's like the concept that we view. It's almost like the a Brady Bunch theory. You can take these two separate families, this woman, and she'll get with this man, and everything will take the names and everything works out. And I think that that's the ideal that so many people look for. They look at that as the standard. It's like the Brady Bunch is the standard. We could just make this work. If you're old enough and or slash me, you're old enough and young enough. You remember they remade a version, not exactly the Brady Bunch, but a version of the Brady Bunch in the 90s. Now they had the Brady Bunch in the 60s, but in the 90s, the early 90s, they developed a show called Step by Step, starring Suzanne Summers and Patrick Duffy. And it was the exact same premise, only they mixed the kids up and they gave, the kids more flash and pizzazz for the time. You had the punk rocker kid, but still consistent the way that they always do with casting. Here's your nerdy kid who you kind of don't pay attention to. Here's the pretty daughter who runs into issues. Here's, the bad boy son. It was peak 90s television, peak 90s TV. But again, here's another dynamic of, and every episode that you watch there, and every episode that you even watch in the Brady Bunch, it still was a very traditional dynamic. Dad was dad, mom was mom. Dad would come in like Frank Lambert would come in there ripping JT, ripping Cody, going, not playing around with Dana. No games. But he still was the dad. He was the stepfather who, when they showed it on the show, how they would somewhat give pushback to him, but still perfect, seemed like perfect family through all of it. These are the things that I think people aspire to when they think of seeking the blended family. Like, I think it's very tricky that in media, this is what's put out. We constantly see, and to call it what it is, these are two white families. Like, off the top of my head, I can't tell you a show where they gave you a black blended family. I mean, outside of the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, where it's the nephew who comes in, I can't really think of the black blended family TV show. I would love for somebody to like chime in the comments here and let me know after this post, but media is media. And the idea that two families could come together perfectly, that's always been the mindset. Like, people joke about it now. I'll meet men who've married women with kids, and it's, man, our little Brady Bunch. Oh man, our little Brady Bunch. And that's the idea, because that's the standard. Oh, we're just one big happy family. And those were TV issues that they tried to make like into real life. So I think it's amazing that we have the Brady Bunch kind of as something to look at. I think it was cool that we had Step by Step. I also think that it's a dangerous game that people look at that media to go, yeah, man, we can make this work, when that's a TV show. That is a TV show. And I mean, again, it's the reality. I mean, you look at some of the statistics. I believe you're at almost a little bit over 15% of a little bit over 15% of kids who are non-voters. Non-voters. We're talking like 17, newborn to 17 years old. Over 15% of them live in some form of a blended family. And when they do these numbers, the overwhelming number of kids who live in blended families, it's with a step father. Like there's in the United States of America, the the most likely blended family are African Americans. Like it's black people. Like behind that is, the brown brothers and sisters. But your most common blended family are black families. And in those black families, the overwhelming majority are stepfathers. So again, now we didn't, really have it on TV. I just thought of one right now. The only thing that I can think of close, and this is a horrible example. If you really clip this, if you really think about it, at the idea that there's like a Brady Bunch theory that we can make this blended family work and it's awesome and it's amazing. Like he was an architect. He was getting to the bag. Frank Lambert on Step by Step was also like an architect or a contractor. And but like those are like again, these are like the white people shows. Off the top of my head, the only black semi blended family that I can think of is like Tyrese's character in Baby Boy. Like if I really think about it, like Melvin, like that was the because it was like the father figure, like that was it. I just thought about that right now. That's horrible because Baby Boy is a horror film. Topic for another day. But no, this is if you think about it, in they're back in the 60s and they make this show and it mirrors what they were seeing with a lot of families because of course back then at the time, statistically, your often your remarried couples were white couples who were getting divorced and then entering into new relationships. Because back then, your statistically speaking, your stronger marriages were in your black community. But now you look at today, look at around like most recent numbers around 2023. Yeah, you're at over 15% of kids who are non-voters, kids under the age of 18 are in blended families. And if you are in, again, if you are the likelihood of you ending up in a blended family, 28%. 28% of black kids most likely end up in a blended family. And again, the majority of those black children in a blended family are going into a situation where there is a stepfather. Gusta, what does this episode have to do with anything? It has everything to do with everything. See, the Brady Bunch was an amazing show. It was entertaining for the 5, 6 seasons that it ran. And it mirrored at a time certain aspects of life, but we have gone that way of living the way of the dodo. More women in the workforce, increase of technology, uh, increase of cost of living, but maintaining incomes. They lived in a fat crib with 6 kids. Step by Step was the same. Like I enjoyed nostalgia. I look back and I think of on that same run, TGI Friday, like Carl Winslow did all that. Carl Winslow was living nice on a Chicago cop salary. But times have changed. So we think about the idea of like a Brady Bunch theory, like we just melt these families and it works together. That's TV. And it's hard to make that work in reality. We think of Step by Step. That's TV. That's hard to make work in today's world of reality. And I think that often because we take this approach of looking at media as a standard, because it's there, because it somewhat mirrors life, there aren't people who are really looking in the mirror. So you meet these people who joke and say, "Oh yeah, man, we're just a Brady Bunch family. We're just a Brady Bunch." It's like, well, you're not necessarily the Brady Bunch because you came in with one child or no children, and this woman came in with 2 to 3. So it's not really Brady because they were going in with an equal amount of kids. It's in the Brady situation. You're not an architect. It's in the Brady situation. You're not living in that kind of crib. The cost of living has shifted. Work-life balance has shifted. Things have changed. So using this model doesn't work. So when I hear people say, remember like the Brady Bunch, no, I can't, because it doesn't apply to today's world. Most of the men who are stepping into these roles, hell, most of the women who are stepping into these roles, their dynamics have changed. So you can watch, you can enjoy the lives that the Bradys lived and that step by step lived. Or like I said, if you want the black version, you want to go ahead and look at Melvin and Baby Boy. I mean, in the end, it worked out fine, covered up a crime, but hey, but that's not reality. That's media. So as you approach this lifestyle, or if you're questioning if this is what you want, you really got to think, is it, I mean, is it really, can you really be Mike Brady in today's world? Can you really be Frank Lambert in today's world? Hell, brother, you my brother in Christ, you could be Melvin. You could be Melvin. But can you be Frank Lambert? Can you be Mike Brady? Really think about that. On the next episode, I'll go more into the somewhat celebrity worship of stepfatherhood in life, because that's what this is. It's not necessarily this celebrity worship, but it's what people behold as this is what we be versus what life actually is. And not to say that people can't do it, but times have changed. Times have changed. When you realize that around 66% of kids who live with a parent, a step parent, like they're the Bradys. They're married. Then you think of that remaining 33 or 34%, they just live with some folk who together. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not Brady. It's not the ideal. But then again, we've also gotten away from marriage as a country. Just something to think, something to ponder on, something to make you realize that you ain't no Brady's. And quite honestly, I don't think you want to be. Appreciate you for listening. Till the next time. Peace.